Show of strength or show of weakness? Days after Donald Trump left Beijing, Vladimir Putin's turn in the Chinese capital. The Russian president can boast that, unlike his U.S. counterpart, he'll be signing actual business deals. But the biggest one may have to wait. Xi Jinping in no hurry to agree to the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, which would double Russia's exports to China. We'll ask why, particularly during a global energy crisis. Since 2022, Russia's dependence on China has grown as it remained bogged down in the war in Ukraine. Today, more so than ever. Of late, the enemy's drones hitting key infrastructure further and further inside of Russian territory. For its part, the Kremlin publicly flexing its muscle with, for instance, 3 days of joint military drills with Belarus to practice deployment of nuclear weapons. Show of strength or weakness? Who's really got the momentum at the outset of yet another summer of war in Europe? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if Vladimir Putin is on the back foot. With us, she boasts former postings at the French embassy in Beijing, NATO headquarters in Brussels. Léonie Allard, now resident fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
From Geneva, former Russian diplomat Boris Bondarev. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
From Frankfurt, Mikhail Polyansky, researcher at the Peace Research Institute in Frankfurt think tank. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
And Richard Verly, Paris correspondent for Swiss news site Blick.
Good evening, François.
Your latest book in French is The America That Hates Us. Your road
Cette
trip.
Amérique qui nous déteste, indeed.
Road trip across the United States. Thanks for being with us. On the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. For Donald Trump, first visit to China in 9 years. We talked about it on the show last week. For Vladimir Putin, well, it's only been 8 months since he was in Beijing. Karis Garland has more.
Greeted on the tarmac by China's foreign minister, it was a warm and ceremonious welcome to Beijing for Russian President Vladimir Putin. His trip coincides with the 25th anniversary of the Sino-Russian Treaty of Friendship. In a video address released before his arrival, Putin said Russia-Chinese relations had reached a, quote, unprecedented level.
Their special nature is reflected in the atmosphere of mutual understanding and trust, and supporting each other on matters affecting the core interests of both countries, including protection of sovereignty and state unity.
Experts say the significance and timing of this visit runs deeper still, coming just days after one by US President Donald Trump. This highlights China's growing diplomatic leverage amid a disrupted world order, and at least in Russia's case, Beijing is holding most of the cards. While the West hit Russia with sanctions, China has become one of Moscow's most important economic lifelines and is today the main buyer of sanctioned Russian oil. Putin will be hoping President Xi Jinping deepens Beijing's commitment, including with talks on the construction of the major Power of Siberia 2 natural gas pipeline from Russia to China through Mongolia. Meanwhile, observers don't expect any breakthroughs on the war in Ukraine. Beijing has regularly called for talks to end the conflict, but has never condemned Russia for sending in troops.
Regarding the Ukraine crisis, China's position has been consistent and clear that dialogue and negotiation are the only way to resolve the crisis.
Some analysts believe the issue of Taiwan could represent an underlying theme during Putin's visit. Deeper energy ties with Moscow would help secure China's fuel supplies in the event of a future conflict over the island.
So, Léonie Allard, last week Donald Trump, now Vladimir Putin. Beijing's the place to be.
That's, I think, what Beijing wants you to think. That's what the state media is saying. We're hosting two global leaders at the same time. We have an array of leaders coming through Beijing. But at the same time, the visit last week did not yield many deals, did not yield nothing more than no concessions, no escalation is what's
Which of the
here.
two visits seems more consequential?
I think the visit that is upcoming, the President Putin coming to China, will possibly yield more deals, even if not Power Siberia 2. We could see more important deals on existing overland pipelines. And the timing of the deal itself is a meaning in terms of how much Xi is willing to shield Moscow from defeat at a time where Putin is weakened.
How much is China willing to go out on a limb for Moscow?
I think both countries are short of an alliance, but they have very converging interests when it comes to stability of their authoritarian regime that trumps everything, and their national security trumps everything. And whenever that is destabilized, they will come to help each other.
Boris Bondarev, you agree that this visit is possibly more consequential than the one we saw last week? Remember, it was the first visit by a U.S. president to China in 9 years.
Well, it depends on how you define consequence, because the no visible results of the last Trump visit is the consequence. And it will have later consequences in Chinese-American relations, and it will reflect on the world one way or another. So it's kind of a philosophical question. But I think the Putin's visit to China will be much more detailed. Yeah, I agree with this, and they are likely to strike some more or less real, like grounded agreements, maybe branch agreements, something like not major things, but quite useful minor things that would strengthen Russian position somehow in the face of this not very bright situation on the battlefield.
Not very bright on the battlefield, and we'll get back to that battlefield. But Boris Bondarev, with each of these visits, every time Vladimir Putin goes to Beijing, how does the balance shift between Moscow and Beijing?
Moscow objectively grows more dependent on China, of course. But I would like to stress that I don't think either in Beijing or in Moscow, they truly believe that they have kind of a suzerain vassal relationships or even junior and senior partners. I think they consider themselves like allies, sort of. One ally which needs more help than the other one, but the other one, I mean China, is very much interested in not letting its northern ally to fail in this war. So they are in one boat, actually. And this choice made by President Xi when he decided to follow Putin into this war, when he decided to support Russia in its aggressive war against Ukraine.
Yeah, Mikhail Polyansky, you just heard Boris Bondarev's wording there. Allies, sort of. What do you think about this relationship between Russia and China?
Vladimir Putin said once that Russia actually has no allies because being allies with someone really means giving up part of its sovereignty. And the Russian regime currently is absolutely obsessed about giving up any sorts of sovereignty, be it to China or anyone else. Maybe if I may address one of the questions that you put forward to Boris Bondarev before. In my opinion, this visit, which, by the way, is one of the 4 visits that Putin and Xi Jinping are going to have this year in total, such state visits are prepared in advance, and I think if some sort of a breakthrough, be it with regard to Power of Siberia 2 or something else were to happen, we would have somehow got hold of it. From my understanding, no such sort of leaks have been present in the media. So I would say that this is just a regular, if you want, even a routine meeting, which Putin has already done more than 20 generally in China, and he will go to China once again this year. So I think it's about symbolics. Quite a lot of it is about symbolics and showing that this friendship, and this year is the 30th anniversary of the so-called strategic partnership between Russia and China, is still there. But it's quite a lot of Russian politics, be it domestic or foreign, it's quite a lot about symbolics, and this is just one of the most vivid examples of it.
Explain to us this Power of Siberia 2 pipeline project. It's been talked about for years, and now we're at this point where China suddenly is without the oil that goes through the Strait of Hormuz and the gas. Why are they being so deliberate, the Chinese, in signing on the dotted line?
So, Power of Siberia 2 pipeline has been discussed about for many years right now, and from my understanding, at least, China does not want to be dependent on anyone, be it strategic partners, as they call Russia or anyone else. But at the same time, as you've rightfully mentioned, now as the crisis at the Strait of Hormuz is happening, the situation on the global markets is changing. So I think this sort of puts a bit more weight on the scales of signing that deal. But even if that does happen, right, it's going to take at least 5 years if we are to take the Power of Siberia 1, which, if my memory serves me right, took around 5 years to build. So if that happens, this is going to be around somewhere 2030, right? And the situation is probably going to change 3 or maybe 4 times until then. So in that sense, again, it's quite a lot about symbolics. And if this deal is signed, this will sort of serve Russia's image well. But when it comes to real operational value, I doubt that it will have any significance in the coming years.
All right, so China's certainly making Russia wait for it. Its foreign minister firmly denying, by the way, reported doubts of its president over the war in Ukraine. Xi Jinping, according to the Financial Times, told Donald Trump that Vladimir Putin might regret the invasion. The newspaper had also, Richard Varley, had Trump suggesting the three leaders should cooperate against the International Criminal Court. Let's talk just that last sentence through again. The three leaders should cooperate against the ICC. None of the three countries are members of the ICC. True. What does that tell you about the state of superpower relations in 2026?
That tells me a lot about how Donald Trump sees the world. And he has said it officially on the record. He considers that each of these great countries, namely the United States, Russia, and China, have the right over their zone of influence. So they have the right to be an empire. So that's the view Donald Trump has of the world. So I'm not surprised at all that he wishes that those three leaders, including himself, put a fight against the International Criminal Court. Now, what we have to keep in mind, we didn't say it, the fact that Putin is now in China right after Donald Trump was not planned. Donald Trump was supposed to go to China in March, and he did not go because of the war in Iran. So now we have a sequence where Putin is following Trump, but in reality, he should not have. We should have had Trump.
His visit was planned in early February.
Exactly, and early February. Sorry, I said March. My mistake. And it was postponed because of the war in Iran.
No, Trump was March. It was in early February that they agreed on this date for the Russian president.
Okay, that's right. So Trump visit was supposed to be in March, and keep that in mind. If he had been in China in March and Putin right now, the situation and the overlooking would be a bit different. Right now, what we do expect somewhat is for Putin to address also the war in Iran. Putin and Xi will talk about Iran. They will talk about the oil market. They will talk about the regime in Tehran that they know very well. Deep inside, those two countries, Russia and China, have an inside knowledge, very precise, of the regime in Tehran. So it's not on the table officially, but I'm quite sure, and I suspect a lot of their time talking together will be devoted to this crisis at the moment, because it puts Trump in a very difficult position, and Russia and China can take advantage.
And do you agree with Vladimir Putin that when the history books are written, this trip by Vladimir Putin will perhaps be more consequential than the one by Donald Trump last week?
I would agree as of today, and based on the information I have. Now, what we do not know, is whether there are still negotiations going on between China and Iran, and maybe Trump came back to Washington with something from China that we do not know. I'm just being modest there. I hope for him that he came back with something else than what he has officially announced, because what he has officially announced is close to nothing.
Do you see the Chinese rolling up their sleeves
On Iran?
on Iran? Do you see them getting involved?
It's interesting to see, to think about the Russians and the Chinese discussing this because they have very diverging interests. For the Chinese are importers, one of the biggest importers. The Russians are one of the biggest world exporters. The Chinese would benefit from, the Russians would benefit from a market that's more volatile, more expensive, and the Chinese would face worsening terms of trade. So they have maintained a sort of facade of entente regarding that topic, but they come from different positions. Even if the Chinese have shown some sort of resilience, it will certainly come up. But I think really this visit is consequential. Also, even if it's it wasn't planned like this. Indeed, we didn't know when the Russians would visit China either, so there might have been a lot of thinking around the timing. And we saw that Donald Trump went to China without visiting any ally in the region. On the other hand, you have, which every president generally does when they visit China, generally it's Japan, sometimes South Korea, or other partners. But this time, we have the impression that Xi Jinping is going to host Putin and maybe give some information or debrief, or in any case, it's a show of partnership that's very important and strong.
All right, so a show of partnership, and as you're saying, they don't have the same interests necessarily when it comes to oil markets. The Russians, well, for the Russians, it's been kind of a mixed bag. They have seen the price of oil go up. That's good news. On Monday, the United States rolled over for another 30 days, a moratorium on sanctioning Russian oil already at sea. The UK has just announced something similar regarding diesel and jet fuel that's Russian and that is in third countries. Russia's revenues have risen since February the 28th and the US-led war against Iran, but whose oil output has shrunk. These are images from April 17th of the Tuapse refinery on the Black Sea. It's been hit repeatedly since the end of December. According to the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, year-on exports from Tuapse are down 65%. And so, on the one hand, you have the rising cost on the world market, Mikhail Polyansky. On the other, you have the lowering output. How is Russia doing?
Well, Russia is not doing particularly well. For several months now, there is a ban on exports of petrol to the outside, to other countries, with some very few exceptions like Mongolia. Russia is still exporting crude oil and diesel, but at the same time, some of the Ukrainian officials are saying that those are the real sanctions sort of on the Russian oil sort of area, so to say. This is the point which Russia could use to its advantage to make up to all of the losses and the dents that have been made by European sanctions. But they cannot do that. But even if they could, honestly, and I would be interested what other colleagues thinking on that, but given the more than 4 years of very heavy spending and depleting the national wealth reserve, I wonder if even this 60 days would be able to mend this significant economic hardships that Vladimir Putin has brought upon Russia by this war. Donald Trump has also allowed Russian tankers to anchor at Cuba, for instance. That was also an image win, if you will, for Russia. But again, as I've said in my previous answer, it's a lot about symbolics, right? So Russia is demonstrating that it's sort of overcoming its economic isolation. But at the same time, we see, for instance, Ukrainian drones hitting Russian shadow fleet in the Mediterranean or hitting its refineries. So again, I think the effect, the overall effect, if you put all the factors together that we've been talking about, the overall effect is quite marginal.
The overall effect is marginal. Boris Bondarev, you know, the optics for panels like this one, they seem to change on a dime, because a couple of months back, we were saying how it was Ukraine that was feeling the brunt of the nightly strikes. We were talking about how Russia had sort of wartime proofed its economy, making that switch. What's it like inside of Russia right now? Do ordinary citizens notice a difference from a year ago, 2 years ago?
If we speak about the economic situation, then yes, the situation is deteriorating, and it's been deteriorating since the beginning of the war. But the process itself is quite slow. So it's not that you wake up and today the prices are 5 times higher than they were yesterday. No, it doesn't work like that. So the tension and dissatisfaction among the population is rising, but it is rising quite slowly. And the recent UAV attacks by Ukraine on Russian cities, including Moscow and some other cities, they add up to this, of course, because the people have new impressions. Yeah, for instance, Moscow has never been under such a massive wave of attack like it was last time, and some people get some feeling that something serious is happening, something is coming closer. But we cannot say that this impression, this mood is spreading very much right now. The propaganda, state television is mostly ignoring all this or saying like nothing really serious has happened. So a lot of people still, I don't think they feel the repercussions of the war, but they do not connect the dots. They do not connect the deteriorating economy, the rise of prices and other things, even these UAV attacks, sometimes they do not connect it with this special military operation, or even closer, they do not connect it directly to President Putin. I mean,
And will that continue? Will that continue to be the case so long as it remains officially a special military operation, which means that if it's not labeled a war, you don't have to have a massive conscription?
Well, they did massive conscription, massive mobilization, right? In 2022, in 2023, I think. Sorry, I may be mistaken. In autumn, I think, yeah, September 2022, there was the draft. Yeah, 300,000 people were drafted. So it was still a special military operation, and it is still, and it will be for foreseeable future. That's not the problem with the naming. The problem is that this war is not yet realized by the majority of people as something that should stop right now. Some independent polls indicate that, yes, there is growing intention of people that this abnormal situation must stop. This war must be over. But it's still kind of an opinion, I would say, rather than demand. In an area of political demands, Russian society is still very, very, apathetic.
Apathetic. I just want a very brief comment on that. Mikhail Polyansky, why are the Russians apathetic?
That's a $1 million question, and I can reference you to several brilliant colleagues like Grigory Yudin, who still manage to study the opinion of Russians, even being outside of Russia. So there is brilliant work done. But what interesting, in my opinion, is that even the official polls, like VTSOM, are demonstrating that more and more people are dissatisfied with how the war is going. And I think this is also one of the consequences of the recent attacks, be it in Moscow or Moscow region or anywhere else. So Ukraine is sort of shifting its strategy of making sure that ordinary Russians also feel the consequences of this war. And I'm not entirely sure to what extent you can remain apathetic in a situation like that. Yes, the Russian regime has been nurturing this feeling of being apathetic, if you will. This was a social contract for many years. which is could be roughly put into words like you do not get involved in the politics, and we ensure you an affordable living standard, or generally okay living standards. But 2014, and I think the latest 2022, the things have changed. Economic and living standards have been dropping, but the state sort of stays in the way that the Russian state does not want Russian citizens to get involved in politics, right? So yes, some people find inner refuge of trying to sort of ignore everything that is going on and remain apathetic. But again, when the war hits home so close, I wonder to what extent it's still possible to stay so indifferent to what is happening around you. I think at some point, whether you want it or not, the prices in the supermarket shelves or the drones may be flying somewhere in the morning to the residential building next to you will make you start, you will start asking questions. I know that it's not so easy to do when the internet cutoffs are happening on a regular basis. So the sources of information are getting narrower, and what state...
It works until it doesn't. Speaking of drones, on the eve of the sit-down between Putin and Xi, Beijing downplaying there was a strike against a Marshall Islands registered Chinese cargo ship by a Russian drone. No casualties reported aboard the KSL De Yang. Drone warfare, by the way, making it awkward moments for both sides after Latvia, Estonia this Tuesday announcing that a Romanian F-16 NATO jet had downed a Ukrainian drone in its airspace, reminding Kyiv to steer well clear of its territory. When it targets Russia, this drone warfare kind of can easily draw in lots of other players,
Yes, and it is undoubtedly something that the Chinese are looking at closely. What are they witnessing at the moment? Xi Jinping is receiving Putin, who is supposedly far stronger than Ukraine, normally. I mean, Russia, army, the size, the type of weaponry that they have. I mean, on paper, they are far more powerful than Ukraine. But who is being received at the moment in the Gulf region to sell drones, to sell anti-aircraft technology, anti-drone technology? That is Volodymyr Zelensky. So the guy who is going around, the guy who at the moment has the momentum.
Why is that?
Because he's got something to sell. Because Ukraine has something that Russia doesn't have. Can Vladimir Putin explain to Xi Jinping how Moscow was hit? What about the anti-drone defense in Moscow? What about the anti-drone defense on the refinery, the oil refinery that was hit by Ukraine? In few words, Russia has been exposed to its weaknesses. Ukraine has managed to expose the weaknesses of the Russian system and of Russian defense. And that is something that the Chinese are going to look at closely. Because they also, for two reasons. On the one hand, they also need that technology. I mean, what Ukraine has today is very rare. It's even unique in some respect. And Ukraine has that hedge that China might be interested to have as well. So the terms of the deal between Putin and Xi somewhat is balanced by the fact that now Ukraine not only resists Russia, but is in position to attack and to inflict damages to Russia.
And Leoniela, people forget that Ukraine and China still have diplomatic relations. China was Ukraine's #1 trading partner before 2022. So how does Beijing look at Kyiv these days?
I think because of the relationship between Ukraine and Europe and the fact that Ukraine has really embraced a European future, it's difficult for China-Ukraine ties to remain at the same level as it was before, especially since the Wang Yi, I think it was him that said in Europe last summer that the goal of the Chinese is that the Russians should not lose the war in Ukraine. So it's impossible for them to maintain a positive political relationship. And I think where China goes to look for technologies that it's lacking, it's going to be Russia. It's been documented, I think, in especially by the US, that in terms of submarine technology, missile technology, the imbalance in the economic relationship between Russia and China is going to be compensated by also technological asks from the Chinese side, according to some open source research, and presumably also lessons learned in the drones domain, as well as informational, which we talked about previously.
So this drone advantage, it's kind of a race, right? First of all, we've seen Ukraine's cities on the receiving end of Russian strikes. The country's second city, Kharkiv, digging out this Tuesday from another night of attacks. Elsewhere, 4 killed in strikes on Chernihiv and Sumy regions. It's kind of a chicken and egg race that's been going on for the last 4 years. Ukraine has the advantage right now, as Richard was saying. Could that change on a dime? We saw how the Shahed drones from Iran and the Russian-made drones improved quickly.
Right, and the Chinese also have tremendous advantage in the drone sector because of the ability to apply AI, the progress made in robotics. So even on their own standing, on their own foot, they have a lot to offer in that domain.
Yeah, maybe I should add something. I think when it comes to defense, clearly China wants to talk and is a partner with Russia, not with Ukraine. What I'm just saying is that, you know, Xi Jinping at the moment is looking at the world and looking at all type of opportunities. And Xi Jinping is not really, and we showed it with the gas pipeline, oil pipeline from Russia. He doesn't want to depend, China doesn't want to depend on one sole supplier. So what is true for oil is true for defense as well. Okay, the favorite client, the favorite partner may be Russia, but if Ukraine has something to offer, maybe Ukraine has something that China could steal, because Chinese are good at sending people and stealing some technology, they will do. So what I'm just saying is that what happened those recent weeks, even for China, has changed a bit the game. Russia is not the power that it absolutely not vulnerable. It has shown vulnerability, and China is looking at it.
All right, Russia, which is ahead of this trip, announced 3 days of nuclear weapons drills involving thousands of troops across the country. This after neighboring Belarus on Monday launched joint drills with Russia to practice the use of nuclear weapons that Moscow's deployed on the territory of its neighbor and ally. Boris Bondarev, is this a sign of strength or weakness?
Well, I would say it's both. Of course, it's a sign of strength, because Russia demonstrated it clearly has a very formidable nuclear arsenal, and some of this arsenal is deployed allegedly in Belarus, which is the Russian response to NATO nuclear sharing. But the obsession with which Russia makes these exercises from time to time and quite often, I think demonstrates that they becoming more and more, I would say, well, sort of desperate, because the nuclear weapons is the last and the only magic wand which really still at disposal of Vladimir Putin, because his conventional troops are, well, seem to be incapable of breaking through Ukrainian defense for now.
And over the last 4 years, over the last 4 years, Ukrainians have repeatedly stated that it's all bluff when they talk about nukes. Do you agree with that?
Well, you know the Anton Chekhov's words that if there is a rifle on the wall, it must fire at the end of the show. So nuclear weapons exist, and there is a physical possibility that it can be employed. So it can be bluff, and I think it was bluff in 2022 when there was a deliberate leak to the United States that Russians were seriously contemplating the nuclear use against Ukrainian offensive in Kharkiv and the Kherson regions. But if Vladimir Putin believes that he cannot make any more progress on the front line in Ukraine, he will seek for another way out. How to break through Ukraine, not in Ukraine, this asymmetrical response, and they in Moscow put it. So it may be some provocation, armed provocation in Europe, in Baltic states, in Moldova, in Romania, for instance, or it can be also a nuclear use. We cannot exclude this possibility.
All right. Ukraine, which we've been saying in our panel, is of late scoring points with major powers with its drone technology, and perhaps with a chance of warming of its ties on its western flank. As Hungary's new prime minister this Tuesday makes his first trip to Poland, Peter Magyar briefing reporters on the start of talks with Kyiv on minority rights for ethnic Hungarians who live and have lived for centuries inside of Ukraine. Richard Verly, you covered the campaign in Hungary that saw the ouster of the Putin-friendly Viktor Orban. These overtures between Kyiv and Budapest, how important do they matter?
I think that's a very smart move from the new Hungarian Prime Minister, because the issue of the ethnic Hungarians in Ukraine has been always used by Orban. It has fueled Orban nationalism, and it has fueled Orban distrust towards Zelensky. So with the change of government in Budapest, it's a good time for Zelensky, for the Ukraine government, to offer something to those to the new government in Hungary. So I think by putting on the agenda at first the question of the Hungarian minority, Peter Magyar is not only scoring a point, but maybe consolidating his base to show that he also, not only Orban, not only Fidesz, he also cares about the Hungarians abroad. And those were also always the clients of Orban. So he's got two, I would say, he killed two birds with one stone. On the one hand, he lent a hand to Zelensky. On the other hand, he consolidated his political gain in Hungary.
Leonie Allard, for Europeans, this is good news, because the show began with us talking about Donald Trump wanting to band together with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping against the ICC. Is Europe being able to rally its troops better than it has in a while?
I think so. I think this is a great news for Europe, and in general, the transatlantic relation or ability to as Europe approach the US or China in a united front will be much more important with this victory in Hungary.
A victory in Hungary, you call it. Now, there's also the question of, because it was talked about during that very short truce that took place last week around Victory Day, of a mediator. Now, she insists she doesn't want to have that role, but Angela Merkel, who this Tuesday was among the recipients in Strasbourg of the European Order of Merit, she says she does want to see the EU raise its game diplomatically. In an interview with German broadcaster WDR, the former German chancellor stating, quote, "It's not enough for U.S. President Donald Trump to maintain contact with Russia." I know, Mikhail Polyansky, that Vladimir Putin would have liked to have seen former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, who's now at the head of Gazprom, or on the board of Gazprom, be the one to play mediator. That was swiftly rejected. Do you see Angela Merkel playing a role, even though she says she's not interested?
Yeah, the interview that you just cited, I think the quote was more or less what she said, that you need someone with real political power to mediate. And she brought up the Minsk agreements when she and President Hollande were brokering the deal between Russia and Ukraine, where Russia, interestingly enough, did not consider itself to be party of a conflict, and also officially was put as a mediator, even though it was directly part of the conflict. I think if there is a real political will on the Russian side, the question of mediator will solve itself very quickly, and the negotiations will not break over the issue of whether Gerhard Schröder will be allowed to broker a deal or not. I think there will be a fitting political figure from Europe to do that. But again, I think the question of political will is the one that should be solved first.
All right, depends on the political will of Moscow. Still, Leonie Allard, do you see the East German-raised, Russian-speaking Angela Merkel as the mediator who can come in?
I don't know if it's the best mediator, but the situation we're in right now is that at least what you see in the US national security strategy, that the US sees itself as a mediator and not anymore a party, let's say, not necessarily in the war, but at least, on the side of NATO and its allies and to support Ukraine. It's clearly said that the US looks at itself as a mediator. So it's important, I think, for the Europeans to provide an answer to that dilemma.
Quick final word on this, Richard Verly?
Well, that comes to the subject of my book. Is America hating us? So is America still ready to provide help and assistance to Europe in fighting with Ukraine? Or at the contrary, is America's Trump ready to sever its link and to make it more difficult for Europe? Keep in mind, we'll have a NATO summit in Ankara early July and a G7 summit soon in Evian. We'll know more if Trump is coming in France.
All right, Richard Verly, deft at promoting his book. Kind of an art of the deal thing you got going there.
That is.
Many
Trump's lessons.
Right. Richard, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Leonie Allard. I want to thank Boris Bondarev for being with us from Geneva, Mikhail Polyansky from Frankfurt. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.